On a Friday morning. It is February the 24th. Holy cannoli, we're almost done with February, which means we're almost done with meteorological winter. There's going to be half the weather people in the country that are like, nobody cares about that. And the rest of us are like, hey, it's something to talk about. So let's talk about it. This morning, though, we do have something to talk about. There is some fog around Central Florida. Let's take a live look outside. This is our tower cam shot in downtown Orlando. Now, granted, understand this tower cam is on the top of one of the buildings. So, we're a couple of 100 feet up. But nevertheless, we have been tracking a little bit of fog out the door. Happy to report, though, as we wake up this morning, there is nothing showing up on our first warning live Doppler radar. You got some moisture in terms of low cloudiness and fog, but no rainfall. So our Friday morning is not looking too bad. As I type visibility and get that. The fog, though, is something we've been watching, particularly thick in spots. Like when I left the house, no fog. When I got back to the house, I'm like, I'm in Lando Calrissian's world here. So just a heads up, you can kind of see it around I-4, West Volusia, back over to Daytona Beach even. And then through Sanford, particularly thick, at least according to all the latest sites, all the way down toward Legoland, and if you're commuting down toward Sanford or toward Tampa. So heads up on that, my friends. Otherwise, nothing going on in the world of weather. Nice, quiet conditions. Take a look at these temperatures around Central Florida. 66 degrees in Orlando. I like it. It's comfortable. It's certainly milder than we should be, but it doesn't feel all that bad. My son has a triathlon at school. Don't have to have him in that big, thick, heavy coat, so that's always good. 71 degrees in Leesburg, 69 in the Villages, 64 degrees in Daytona Beach. Yeah, looking very, very nice this morning. Yesterday, we got awful close to records. We got awful close to an all-time record for the month of February. 90's the hottest we've ever been in the month. We made it into the upper 80s yesterday. We're again today going to make it into the upper 80s. So here's a look at our 12-hour forecast. Upper 70s, 11 o'clock, mid-80s by 1 p.m., and 88 degrees, our high temperature at 3 o'clock. Bright, beautiful sunshine. We're kind of stuck in this trend. It's not a bad one, but we're stuck in this trend of warmer than average temperatures. We find on average temperatures running in the mid-70s. Now, of course, there's days above and days below, but we are way above that. Look at this weekend's forecast. Upper 80s, bright sunshine, little sprinkle or two on Tuesday. Temperatures dropping off into the mid-range of the 80s, and then getting back to about 87 by Thursday. So even with a little frontal passage or a little turn of the winds here by early next week, we're not doing much. Morning temperatures also get a little bit of a reset from the mid-60s on Tuesday back into the lower 60s on Wednesday. Okay? All right, we're going to talk a little more about our local forecast later on, but what I do want to do is I want to invite in our guest today. Today is Friday, and of course, during the quieter months of the year, we like to try and bring some guests in, and today is one that I've been trying to get him in for a very long time. This is Tony Cristaldi, everybody. He's a meteorologist over at the National Weather Service office in Melbourne. Tony and I chat quite a bit. And Tony, I'm trying to think. I've been at least in your presence for more than 20 years. I've come around and bothered you, back when I was a weather producer at Channel 9 here in town. So at least, we go back loosely for quite some time. But the reason that we got Tony on today particularly was because back in 1998, 25 years ago, Tony Cristaldi was one of the main meteorologists on the floor that day, issuing all of those tornado warnings. So, Tony, I definitely want to chat with you. But first, Tony, good morning to you, sir. Tell everybody a little bit about you.
Oh, gosh. Good morning, Eric. It's always a pleasure being here. I've been at the National Weather Service for 31 years, 29 in Melbourne. Got down here in 1994. I'm originally from upstate New York. Lived up there for about 30 years. My first duty station was Albany, New York. And like I said, I transferred down here in 1994, and I've been here ever since.
Wow. That's a good, that's a good run in the government world, right?
We're getting a little long in the tooth, but we still got a few years left in me at the end.
Hey, you and even beyond retirement, you will have plenty left in the tank there. So tell everybody that may not be aware, we're both in the weather world, but we have very different roles. Tell everybody what the role is of a meteorologist at the National Weather Service.
Well, Eric, we're responsible for issuing warnings to protect life and property. We issue forecasts for 10 counties in East Central Florida. There are 6 National Weather Service offices in the state, one in Tallahassee, one in Jacksonville, and then in Central Florida you have Tampa, and over here in Melbourne, and then you have Miami, which handles South Florida, and then the Key West office, which exclusively handles the Florida Keys. We issue your 7-day forecast. We issue coastal waters forecasts out to 60 miles. We issue boating and beach forecasts. We issue fire weather forecasts, which is getting to be more and more important here as we get in this hot and dry stretch of weather. We issue terminal forecasts. We have I believe the second most number of terminal forecasts, 10 of any National Weather Service office in the U.S., of which is I think over 130. So, but the mission of the National Weather Service is issuance of warnings and forecasts for protection of life and property.
And that certainly comes into play during more severe events, such as hurricanes, tropical storms, tornadoes, derechos, any number of different phenomenon that occur. So your role in the scheme of how the public digests information is you are the one that issues the tornado warning. And when that happens, us TV types jump on the air and say, the National Weather Service has issued this tornado warning.
Right. I mean, we consider you guys, everyone in the Orlando and West Palm Beach media for our southern counties, our partners, our voice, so to speak. So it's a very important cooperative partnership that we have with the media.
And I would agree. I'm grateful, first off, for our friendship, Tony, but for the partnership that your office and in Tampa and Jacksonville works with us on, because it really is a partnership. Everybody on all television platforms, at least in the Orlando market, all of the TV meteorologists are meteorologists. So we'll all work on our own forecasts, and we may have, different perspectives of things because of different education backgrounds. But when it comes to critical weather, certainly it's the National Weather Service office issuing a tornado warning. And there'll be times where I'll say oh, this cell looks suspect, and I'll pop in, we have a little background chat, soon to be Slack, which will be great, where we can chat and kind of keep the back channels open among media types and among the National Weather Service and refer to different cells and, hey, what are you guys seeing on this, and all that fun stuff. So I think it's a really nice fluid partnership between TV media and the National Weather Service.
Absolutely. And some people like to phrase it as portrayed as some sort of competition, and it's really not. It's really not. And there are things we do, there are things we can't do that you do as when you go with wall-to-wall coverage and you're giving minute-by-minute updates. We just don't have that capacity to do that doing what we do.
And it's and to piggyback on that, we've got this offline chat, and you're so right, we're feeding information not just from WESH to the National Weather Service, but the other TV stations, newspapers, etc., can see this information as well. And it's not one of those things that we hide it from everybody, because we are in the business of trying to keep people safe. I always joke, right? At least in the TV world, Tony, I feel like our salespeople, they handle all that competition stuff. Let them sell it. But for us, we're in the business of actually keeping people safe. And that is a direct partnership with your, with the folks that you work with and with all of the media types here as well. So, yeah.
And it's a two-way exchange of information. We get a lot of reports directly from the public, but we also probably more heavily rely on media reports of severe weather and damage and things like that, flooding, those type of things.
Yeah. So you were talking this morning, and by the way, Tony, how long have you been awake? When did your shift start?
Oh, my shift started at 10 o'clock last night. I'm usually the midnight guy, so I usually work 9-hour shifts between 10 at night and 7 in the morning.
So Tony has hung out just to hang with us on Coffee Talk. So everybody, I think we need to thank you, Tony, for
Well, high five.
Sticking around. Appreciate it. I
I
owe you a
enjoy
cup
this.
of
I
coffee,
enjoy
sir.
this.
Do what?
Oh, I enjoy this. It's always a pleasure.
Well, thank you. All right. So, talk a little bit about let's go back and talk about 1998 because we've just had the 25th anniversary of the 1998 tornadoes. So, talk about what your role was in that event.
Well, there were two people actually left in the office who from that time period, and it's the two that were actually who were the primary warning and the radar meteorologists. There's myself. I was a general forecaster back then. I'm a senior forecaster now. And then there's Dave Sharp, who's one office away right now. He was the science and operations officer back in 1998, and now he's the meteorologist in charge. I believe he's been, I think, for the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we were the guys who were monitoring the radar, issuing the warnings, basically doing what we could to get that information out. And it was just such a tremendous amount of information that we sent out last night or that night. And when we look back on it 25 years in the rearview mirror, given the technology
Yeah.
of the time, I just scratch my head in amazement that we were able to issue so many products, and keep people safe. One of the things we regret the fact that 42 people lost their lives.
Sure.
But we feel that there would have been a heck of a lot more had it not been for the information we provided.
100. I mean,
tremendous amount of lead time for all those tornadoes.
Yeah.
And back then the technology for people to receive warnings, especially at night, just wasn't there. There was, they had TV, radio, and no weather radio. You didn't have like wireless alerts. You didn't really have the internet was kind of in its fledgling days.
Right.
People didn't have smartphones. So, I mean, the technology between 25 years ago today, in all aspects of that event, is the change has been tremendous.
100%. So I've been cycling through and just kind of looking around, and like this is an example of one of the tornadoes that was touching down over Kissimmee, looking at that radar velocity, and I'll bring it full screen here. I mean, it's remarkable to see this kind of radar imagery. Certainly, we see this plenty, but in this case in particular, it was happening, and it was happening in a time frame where people were sleeping, and as you mentioned, it was happening in a situation where people didn't necessarily have the situational awareness they do today. That's the only picture you had mentioned that we know of from the 98 tornadoes, and who's responding, but there's your name at the bottom of this: tornado on the ground in Winter Garden. You were typing this, and tell me what it was like knowing, because you'd been here for a little while at least, but knowing that there's a true tornado outbreak playing out. How did that feel for you?
Well, the three things from a meteorological perspective stick out about that night. One was the signatures, the hook echoes, the storm relative velocity couplets, the inbounds and the outbounds, basically the strength of the circulation.
Yeah.
That left no doubt that there were tornadoes. The second thing is the forward speed of these cells. They were between moving. This is not the wind speed of the tornadoes. This is just the motion of the cells, was generally toward the east-northeast at between 50 and 65 miles per hour.
Right.
That's incredible. Just an incredible low-level wind jet that was occurring that night. And then the third was the amount of lightning these cells were producing. We were fortunate enough in our partnership with the 45th Weather Squadron up at Kennedy Space Center, NASA, to have two separate workstations. And we were the only Weather Service office at the time in the United States that had access in 1998 to three-dimensional lightning data.
Oh, wow.
So not only just the cloud to ground, what they call the NLDN, National Lightning Detection Network, but what we called LDAR, which is lightning detection and ranging. And It's basically a three-dimensional box that shows lightning aloft as well as the surface.
Mm-hmm.
And you could see as these supercells, these tornadoes, they cycled up and down, the lightning would just spike through the roof.
Yeah.
And that picture you showed of it was taken from Windermere down toward Disney, looking north toward the Winter Garden tornado. The person took that with a video camera. It's a screen capture from
the video. Yeah, let me bring that back up.
And he remarked he had never seen lightning like that. It was continuous lightning, and that's the only reason you can see the tornado is because it's backlit by lightning. So these cells were just off the charts as far as forward speed, the strength of the rotation, and the amount of lightning they were producing. Yeah. I mean, at the time, Dave and I were so focused on the process of analyzing the storms, issuing all these products. The enormity of the situation really didn't hit us until the event was over.
Sure.
Remember these cells, for those, if you want to put that track map back up.
Oh, yeah.
All those tornado, those tracks, there were cells in between those tracks that had very strong circulations too, that we issued tornado warnings for, that didn't produce tornadoes, but they more than likely produced very strong rotating wall clouds.
Right.
And even as you go farther south, we issued tornado. The event really didn't get over with until the last few cells moved offshore southern Brevard County, down here toward Melbourne.
Mm-hmm.
But that gave us kind of a chance, and I think by then it was probably, I want to say like 6 o'clock in the morning. We started seeing the videos come from Ponderosa RV Park, from Sanford, from Winter Garden. And that's when the enormity of it, I think it just hit Dave and I and everyone else in the office. It just hit us like a ton of bricks.
Right.
That, wow, this is the stuff that you saw on TV as a student meteorologist in the Midwest, that your jaw virtually drops. It was just very, very sobering, saddening, that we issued all these warnings, and still, because the technology just wasn't there and because they occurred at night, that 42 people lost their lives.
Now, in thinking back to 1998, I mean, and for everybody's sidebar, we have a we have a Doppler radar at WESH, but the National Weather Service has a much more powerful, much larger, robust, government-funded Doppler radar that runs on S-band as opposed to C-band, and there's certainly some advantages to that. I'm trying to think. I know that Melbourne was early, like the second or third 88D that was installed, right?
We were the third radar that was installed, the second operational radar that was installed, and the first to be commissioned. The first radar that went up was at Norman, was at what they call the operational support facility, where they did all the testing. Second radar went up in Sterling, which is basically right outside of Washington, D.C., near NOAA headquarters. And we were the third.
And is that because of NASA?
Yes. I think the proximity to NASA and our partnership with them allowed us to get a radar, the third radar delivered and the first commissioned. I mean, it's basically a matter of importance, and the DC radar, obviously, being closely located near
purse strings.
NOAA headquarters. Yeah.
So for everybody's benefit, so there's our live radar sweep. We have a live data stream from the national. There's the radar that's literally outside of Tony's window right now. And technology has changed so much. Like our radar is at WESH, so I get every second. Our radar turns 6 degrees a second. I get new data. The National Weather Service, the way it used to be is they'd do a volume scan, package up data, and send it out, and then we would receive it. And now we get data essentially live as well, particularly depending on what mode what VCP mode you're scanning on. Would you say that this was the first tornado outbreak Central Florida saw in using a WSR 88D, the Doppler radar?
Trying to think. There were several severe weather events. There were some pretty significant hailstorms.
93
in 1992 and 1993.
Yeah.
There was one that produced they were both around UCF and Orlando.
Yep.
And I remember one of them produced such a large amount of hail, and the other one produced very, very large hail, and they were extremely damaging to greenhouses and properties and so forth. As far as tornado outbreaks, which are fairly uncommon outside of tropical cyclones. I would probably say the first one may have been the tornadoes associated with Aaron in 1995,
Yep, yep,
which were tropical cyclone, which were a little bit different. They're very transient, very fast moving.
yeah,
Um, and then, of course, you got to remember too that whole um, winter, that whole dry season was a very strong El Nino, one
yeah.
of the strongest on record. That previous November, 1997, was the New Smyrna Beach F3.
Oh my gosh, I forgot all about that.
Yeah, and there were several events leading up to that in December and January. In fact, the afternoon before the outbreak, there was a tornado that a waterspout that moved on shore in the Atlantic and damaged, I think, a Winn-Dixie, a supermarket there. And 5 days earlier, another waterspout moved on shore, and these weren't like skinny waterspouts. These were supercells over water.
Yeah.
1 block away, it moved on shore in the Atlantic. So those were, and there were several events, watches and warnings in bona fide tornadoes that occurred over toward Orlando and Kissimmee.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's hard to discern. There were so many events, but the setup was just so favorable during that strong El Nino that there were several events leading up
Right.
to what was the culmination of that El Nino season. Because if you recall, right after that, it was like someone turned off the spigot, and
Yep.
suddenly it was fire season.
Yep.
No rain, no storms, and most of East Central Florida had problems with wildfires. So,
And Flagler County was evacuated.
there you go.
Which I'm going to be doing a story on that this summer because it's also the 25th anniversary of that. Yeah, really interesting. I had just in doing research for my 1998 tornado story, I had read that there was a 140 knot streak over top of us for this event. That's wicked.
Well, strong El Ninos in particular, that's the big thing they do. It kind of sets off an atmospheric chain where you get anomalous warming over the equatorial Pacific. What does that do? Well, that fuels a lot of thunderstorm activity. And off of that thunderstorm activity, because high altitude winds that blow off, and you get a very strong subtropical jet stream that moves across usually Southern California, across the southern tier of the U.S., and then across Florida. One of the things that does is beneath jet streams, you get these storm systems, these low pressure areas that occur with relative frequency, like every 4 to 5 days.
Yep.
And the storm track, you'll see these things coming from the Pacific, and they will just blow right across the southern tier of the U.S., which is what happened in 1998. The flip side to that El Nino is when it lingers into the summer and the fall, that wind shear, that strong jet in the low latitudes helps to knock down tropical waves, and you get less in the way of a much less active hurricane season.
And it'll be interesting to see because we're transitioning from a triple dip La Nina to an El Nino.
We're in this, we're headed toward what's called the spring predictability barrier, where the models don't do particularly well. But from what we can see in all the data, La Nina is really on its last legs.
Yeah.
There's the cool pool of water near the surface is rapidly shrinking, rapidly diminishing. And the subsurface warm pool is getting larger, and it's getting more intense.
Yeah.
Which all you need is some atmospheric forcing mechanism to bring that warmer water up to the surface, and we'll switch over. That'll kind of flip the switch, and the odds are highly in favor of eventually. I think it's just a matter of how fast this occurs.
Right. When? Yeah.
Summer, or fall. There is a possibility that it doesn't. We've had these what I call pump fakes where the warm pool just dissipates. You don't get that mechanism to push and upwell that water.
Yeah.
Could happen. But the odds of a quadruple dip La Nina are pretty low.
I was looking through the Climo, and I only found, and maybe you've got a better data source, I only found Climo data for Enzo going back to like the 1950s, and a quadruple dip is not, it's just not like a thing.
It's not in the records. It's not in the records. And it's interesting because when you look at the amplitude of warm El Nino events versus cool La Ninas, El Nino events tend to have more amplitude and are shorter in duration.
Right.
They tend to peak higher, but don't last as long. La Nina doesn't have as much amplitude, the waters don't get quite as cold,
Right.
but they tend to last longer.
Yeah.
And this is the case where we had a triple dip where you had a moderate La Nina, then it kind of weakened back to kind of cool neutral to low end,
Yeah.
and then it cooled back down again. So that happened twice, triple dip.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Very interesting. And we'll just have to see. Of course, I didn't dial up the Enzo prediction graphic while we were talking, and that's just my bad. I want to open it up to questions from anybody that wants to chat with Tony Cristaldi, meteorologist over at the National Weather Service office in Melbourne. It's a very different side of meteorology, but I'm so grateful for the partnership that we have, because it's vital. As you mentioned, it's vital to us doing our job of getting the message out, and it's vital to you to get information in. And anytime that there's storm reports and things, we take a very responsible position on making sure to send information your way. Sidebar, Slack can do images, right? So like if we see something on our radar, we could just throw a screen grab on Slack.
It should be able to do that. We're looking forward to using that.
The internal keep the back channels open National Weather Service weather community chat. It'll be nice. That'll be nice when there's a cell that's in kind of a no man's land between, NextRad sites or, just
Right.
north, to the point where the terminal radar in Orlando doesn't see things great.
Right.
And yeah, I think that'll be nice, especially when we could chime in and Channel 9 could chime in and everybody could chime in and throw in their radar signatures.
Yeah, our ability to interact minute by minute with the Orlando media, with WESH and WFTV and the other stations, that's where we do the frequent updates. We just don't have the ability to interact with the public directly as quickly as you guys do.
Right. Okay, so Eric's asking a question, and I know that you and I have chatted a little bit, but Eric's asking, what are your thoughts of the LRC, the recurring cycle, long-range stuff that you and I have chatted about?
I haven't looked at it very closely beyond what I've seen you some of your presentations.
Yeah.
I'm not a big climatology. There are what's the word when you analogs.
Yes.
Analogs are a very powerful forecast tool, and I believe the LRC, if I'm not mistaken, uses kind of an analog and then a recurrence of these type of analogs.
It's like a teleconnection kind of idea,
It's a very powerful predictive tool. As far as specifics, I think you can narrow down the windows a little bit, but we're never going to be,
agreed,
in my lifetime, at the point where a long range forecast will, you'll be able to call the weather service and say, hey, we're having an outdoor a picnic or barbecue on April 6th.
Yep.
What's the weather going to be like?
Yeah.
You can give people climatology and tell them, well, usually it's one of the drier months and it's usually kind of breezy, and the long range forecast calls for over that month above normal temperatures.
Yeah.
Or below, whatever. But you can't really get too specific, especially as you go farther out in time.
100%. I think the power of it is getting an idea, right? Like I always say that it's like you're driving in a foggy road and you see there's headlights, but that's, you can't say, oh, that's a Honda Accord heading at 150. You get an idea, but that's where that ends, and you have to know your limitation.
Well, there's an old weather saying, the trend is your friend, and I think that's one of the things where you identify analogs and trends.
Yeah.
And you can kind of go from there.
Yeah. That's the trend. You just brought me back to Justin Mosley, that he would always say that from his time at the National Weather Service office there. The trend is your friend. Mickey's asking, thoughts on radar gap holes like, say, northern Marion County. Is it worth trying to fix? And this is not, don't ever, there is zero attempt at a gotcha question. I don't ever want to get you in trouble, Tony.
Those are legitimate questions. We're, we're at the mercy of, as an agency, the funding we get. And we really don't have too much of a say.
Yeah.
Basically, I think the best thing is to, for things like that, is to contact your local congressman or congressperson, I should say, on a state or better yet, federal level, and bring that to their attention, so that maybe they'll fund another study. I mean, there are well-known gaps throughout the United States, and it's just a matter of we don't have infinite funding to put a weather radar every single place. They started off with where, what the financial situation, what the budget would allow. And then they noticed some gaps, and they filled in some of those gaps. They have some radars that, they have some terminal Doppler weather radars at airports. But there's more that could be done, I think, as far as filling some of those gaps. I would say just let your congressperson know that you really think that's something that needs to be done. I'm not going to blow smoke in front of anyone's eyes and say that's not a problem, because it is.
Yeah. And I think that, truth be told, for what it's worth, I think that we are fairly well covered here when comparing to other parts of the country. I mean, there's parts of the country that are
there
blind.
are areas and heavily populated areas that have more significant radar gap, beam height issues. We do, when you look, it's just a limitation of radars. As the beam goes out, it goes up.
Yeah.
So the more radars you put in these intervals and these gaps, the better off you'll be. So.
Mary's asking, Tony, how often are the radar's capabilities updated? That's a good nerd question for you.
Oh gosh, we do software builds. I want to say probably it's probably every few months. Increases the process. We have to increase the hardware. There's hardware and software upgrades where they increase the processing power to match up with the new products that get introduced. Like, for example, it was a significant upgrade for dual pole. For dual polarity was probably the biggest upgrade. And then we had what was called the SLEP, which was basically kind of a maintenance upgrade where they replaced most of the pedestals. Because, the radars here, we're talking about, was it 1991, I think it was installed? So we're, upwards of 30 years, and there's a lot of wear and tear that goes. This radar is, even when this past week, we go into a mode where it doesn't spin around as much and doesn't take as many vertical tilts, but it still spins around and around 24 hours a day.
Yeah, it does. And one thing that I don't think a lot of people realize, that's the National Weather Service radar, okay? So you see the scan, and when we display the scan, it is the lowest tilt at 0.5. But the Weather Service radar does something that our WESH radar does not. Okay, now our WESH radar has the capability to, but in TV we don't need that data, so it's different. For us, we just sit at 0.5 or 0.3 even sometimes, and we just scan. And so the radar doesn't do this very much unless there's a bad weather where we want to do a height scan or something. National Weather Service radar, you have to do a volumetric scan. Can you explain a little of that to everybody out there?
Well, it's basically, it's analogous to a CT scan. You have to get a three-dimensional picture of the atmosphere, and you have to see where your high-intensity echoes are. You have to see where your rotation is, how deep it is, how strong it is, and the only way you can do that is through multiple scans. Our radar starts at half a degree, and it goes all the way up to almost 20 degrees.
I'll cycle through. Not that there's much there, there's ground clutter, but at least I'll cycle through just so that everybody can kind of see. So this is 0.5, and watch how as I click up, you're just going to see the radar looking different. Oh, if I have to click it, there we are. See how it just disappears because there's nothing going on up there.
Right, and you'll notice as you go higher up, the coverage, the aerial coverage will shrink because the radar beam is so high up. It doesn't go out that far.
Right. So what we do in situations where there's severe weather is most of the time we'll use the National Weather Service radar to look at things with height, and we'll leave our radar on the surface just to try and get as much ground truth as, so to speak, as is possible. And
it's important to say too that here, our office, we have access to all the other National Weather Service offices in the U.S. We can pull up Tampa, we can pull up Jacksonville, Miami, and we also have access to the terminal Doppler radars at Orlando, and we actually can any of them in the United States. But primarily, we look at the ones in Orlando, and since we have 10 counties that go all the way down to Lake Okeechobee, we look at the terminal Doppler radar at West Palm Beach pretty frequently too.
Yeah, and side note, and Tony, you and I have talked about this. One thing that I want to try and do is get at least some sort of data feed of the WESH radar. Not that it's, it's just another tool that you guys could have, because it's a different location, and anything to help in that decision-making process on your team is a big deal for us. So we want to help out.
Yeah, we were talking about that earlier. The more, the better. It's like, it speaks to the fact that there are radar gaps, coverage gaps in the U.S. The more radars you have, the better off you'll be. But these radars, they cost money to build, and they cost a lot of money to maintain. It's just a matter. It's a limitation. If we had infinite resources, we could put radars everywhere.
Right.
But the reality of the situation is we don't, and we have to work with the constraints of our agency budget.
Yeah. Okay, so Annette's asking, on RadarScope, the app, do I have access to the National Weather Service radar, or is that exclusive for meteorologists? You know the answer to that.
Well, yes.
That's it.
Yeah. I mean, you can access whatever. Our data goes out to vendors. We have, various agencies. Our radar goes out we have direct lines to the 45th Weather Squadron. We have direct lines that go to the FAA. There's also, what is the warp line that goes out to, oh gosh, this is what you get for working 10 hours.
And you're tired.
The tech company across that developed like Raytheon,
Yeah.
But they do testing on there's a direct line that goes to them as well.
Yeah.
So the vendors turn around and you can grab that, that information. It also is uploaded to central database,
right?
Instantaneously. That I think that's what the WeatherScope grabs it off of, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so. And we're our vendor pays to be able to get the full sales data, so that when you guys get into rapid,
Oh yeah, that's that goes back to another thing about working that event, that you're limited. We worked with a clunky, what was called a principal user processor, which is this big monstrosity of a workstation.
Yeah.
And we were limited to 5-minute or 6-minute scans at best.
Yeah, that's true.
And not only has since then the temporal resolution, with sales cuts that you mentioned, we can get 2-minute 2-minute scans now.
Right.
But the actual resolution of the radar,
100%.
we have what's called super resolution reflectivity, which is and velocity, which is so much better, less pixelated than the coarser resolution data that we had to look at.
I'm zooming into the raw data just for nerdiness. This is his radar here, and so what he's referring to is the size of those pixels, basically.
Exactly.
This is ground clutter.
It's just like your TV, your TV resolution. The smaller the greater the resolution, the greater number of pixels, the smaller each pixel, the better the picture.
Yep.
The better the radar picture. Just like your TV picture.
And I'm going over here and I'll show you one thing that's nice. I can also say that in the upgrades since '98, like the WESH radar has a ridiculously high resolution as well. Like it has moved forward. But one thing that's interesting also. My radar is for me to use. When Tony's on shift, no matter who's operating it at the television station, we can do whatever the heck we want. If we say that there's a tornado in, say, Ocala, we can drop it as low as we want, and we can seriously just sit there and swipe back and forth in a sector scan. You cannot, though. Explain how and why that is such a different world.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because the old generation radars before Doppler, the days of Doppler, you could do just that. The old 74s and the 57s.
Yeah.
Those you would frequently, they had a technique, it was called the wrist technique, where you'd stop the radar, scan back and forth, go up, scan back and forth, go up. Well, it does it automatically now. And there's so much data and so much processing that goes on that you just can't stop the radar.
Yeah.
It would just mess up all the what we call the derived products.
Right.
Like echo tops, the velocity products. You can't just stop it and say, oh well, I'm going to start it again, because all that data would just reset to zero, and you wouldn't get any of these products.
And there's all these people that depend on all that data.
It's a trade-off in that sense, but it's a net plus without a doubt.
Yeah. So the new way, it used to be that you'd have to do your full volume scan before you got back down to the surface, whereas now you've got the ability to get into a situation where you could go 0.5, 1.5, 0.5, 2.5. So you're constantly getting those updates.
Right. And with dual pole, we do that routinely for the velocity scans to get the dual pol data.
Yeah.
And dual pol data is just a matter of, it lets you see more about what type of target is showing up on radar. It gives you products that help you discern between rainfall, between hail. Up north, you'd look at snow, but here we also smoke,
right,
and also biological targets like birds and insects.
So all right, so let me pull that up just for fun.
Tornadoes, one of the dual pol products that you look at is correlation coefficient.
There it is.
And the differential reflectivity that allows you to actually see tornadic debris, what we call debris balls.
Yep. And we use that. This is the product that we use, and during severe weather, it's got a cheeky name. The bosses wanted to call it the debris tracker because correlation coefficient. And honestly, this boss is gone, so I guess we could just call it correlation coefficient. But the old boss wanted to call it debris tracker. But like this, obviously, you're seeing these greens and these blues. That's if these shades on our color table show up as red, then you got the rain. But this is
correlation coefficient. All that is a simplified way of looking at that is how round is this target.
Yeah.
If it's round like raindrops, then that's pretty much what it is. The less round it is, then it's not rain. It'll be, if it's meteorological, you get into where you have hail. And then if it's like smoke and ash particles, then you get really low correlation coefficients because obviously they're not round.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but when they were developing the dual pol technology, they weren't even thinking about debris. It was mainly for like a winter precip type thing, right?
Yes, that's correct. And it's just one of the side benefits of this technology.
It's fascinating, and and I will also say that there are times, quite often, when Tony has on the side just kind of helped me. If there's newer, like when dual pol came out, I know you sent me a bunch of resources to kind of familiarize myself, because once you're out of college, when something new like dual pol comes up, and I mean, Jesus, it's been more than a decade now, I feel like, since you guys got your upgrade. But Melbourne was one of the first sites, and it's like there was just nothing published for a TV Met who's all of a sudden going to get all this new data. And so you helped send me some information just so I could figure it out, Mm-hmm. So I thank you for that. Any other questions? I'm looking at the comments now, Debbie. I apologize. A lot of people are saying, thank you for all of this nerd chat. So it's great.
Well, I enjoy it. I could talk all day about, the 98 outbreak and just the differences in every aspect of that event in 1998 versus 2023.
Yeah.
I mean, it's from typing out, nothing was automated. That's the big thing. Everything is automated now. For example, when we did send out those warnings, we typed them out on a workstation. Now we just click. We just move a mouse and click and maybe type out a few words. Everything else is automated. And when we hit the send button, there's no paper script like in 1998.
Right.
Okay, well, you got to print out the warning or the statement or whatever, hand it to the weather radio person, and they have to read it on the air. They got to press a button to tone alert. Now you hit send, automatic voice, automatic dissemination.
Yeah.
Everything is automated.
So when you say automated, so essentially you do this kind of the similar thing that we do. So say there's a cell in downtown Orlando moving south. So you would just take and draw some sort of a fan, and
that's pretty much how we drew. And that's another thing I forgot to mention. Back in 1998, we did not have warning by polygon. We had warning by county.
Yeah.
So when you issued a warning, it was for the entire county.
Yep.
And you could, in the text, you could say where it is, but the actual warning, instead of highlighting the small box in a county, and that's a pretty significant thing when you're talking about, Brevard County being 70 miles north to south, Polk, we have some big and odd-shaped counties here in Central Florida.
Yeah.
And that the technology to be able to do that, to refine these warnings, is super important.
Okay, couple of random questions. Now I'm reading the questions, so everybody ask them. Everybody's asking, what's your favorite type of coffee? Probably because we all feel like I need to buy you some coffee, which I need to do. So,
my favorite type of coffee?
Yeah.
Right here.
Coca-Cola.
I don't drink coffee. This is my caffeine.
Wow. You're not even a Red Bull guy, huh?
Nah, not a Red Bull guy. And this is Coke Zero too.
On the midnight shift. I love it. I love it. Janet was asking, was the Kennedy Space Center affected by those tornadoes in '98?
We had one tornado. If you pull the map back up, you'll see one that went through the port area.
Stand by, pulling it up.
And it was an interesting story. That's another thing too. The damage surveys. Yeah, see that? Can you get the? I don't know if it's on your screen or my screen. There you go. That number 7.
Yep.
That one was the one that went through Port Canaveral. So one of the things about tornadoes going across the Cape, and we learned this in Irma. I'm personally of the opinion, given the strength of the couplets and the tornado vortex signatures or TVSs, that there were a lot more tornadoes than what were actually verified. But the problem is, if you don't have any damage and you have no trees, it's just flat and scrub, you don't really, unless you're out there doing surveys,
right?
And DOD property, you really can't get on there and see. You'll never know.
Well, and I also wonder if, given dual pole, it's one of those situations where now the situational awareness would be higher. You'd have a better idea of did you have like the NROT product back then?
No.
See, like
no, we didn't have that, or we didn't have. I'm trying to remember when the we did have Meso tracks, I believe, and that would just be like a line that would basically take the strongest velocities and kind of draw a line based off that. We had that Meso tracks.
Yeah.
But and we used to in the old days when we did surveys. You could do a show on damage surveys.
Yeah.
But we would print out those Meso track products
and try and follow it
and take them on and take them on. And keep in mind, I did a large amount of damage surveying, but not the areas that were the hardest hit.
Yeah.
I mapped out the areas east, the extension of the Kissimmee tornado, the eastern extension of that.
Yeah.
The eastern extension of the Winter Garden tornado. And I did the damage survey for Port Canaveral.
Yeah.
And those things, all those damage surveys we didn't have. Today you have a tablet and you have GPS where you can input coordinates and connect the dots that way. I played connect the dots with large pieces of paper on a gazetteer that I Xeroxed, and went crisscrossing on all the roads.
Yeah.
And putting dots on a map, and that's how you see those eastern parts of those tracks. That's how they were composed.
Wow.
And one of the interesting things, and I always bring this up, is that Kissimmee tornado, the eastern part of that. I went to I don't know if you know where the Tassahatchee Preserve is.
Okay.
Eastern Orange County.
I've seen it on a map.
The park ranger there took me through the forest, and there was a lot of old growth forest, and you could see it was like a buzzsaw. You could see where that tornado went through there.
Oh, wow.
And you could see as we went further in the forest, the snapping of the trees got higher and higher until the tornado lifted it. And there's an access road, and it has a bunch of 50,000 watt transformers and power lines.
Yeah.
And it lifted above that. That rotating wall cloud went above a place called another RV park called the Great Outdoors.
Whoa!
It's south of it's west of Titusville, off of State Road 50, extending south.
Yeah.
And it's one of the at the time it was one of the largest RV communities in the United States. I forget the number. It's like 3,000, 1,000, 3,000, 5,000.
Oh my God!
It's huge. It's huge. And then the tornado set back down right around I-95. So it lifted for, I think, a mile and a half.
Just to save those people.
The top of that. Otherwise, you would have had 2 Ponderosa events. And
I never knew that.
Yeah, and you can read about it in the. I think it's mentioned in the damage survey. How serendipitous is that? I mean, it for as bad as it was, that could have easily
doubled.
Doubled. Yeah, exactly.
Wow, that hits a little.
Yeah, and I don't know if people who lived there at the time just realized how close and how lucky they got at the time.
To hear that you could see it going up the trees, that alone is wild. But to imagine that it could have hit another RV park is a lot.
Yeah,
Beverly's
it's very sobering.
Very sobering. Beverly's asking, are there any okay, with all the new technology, are there still storm chasers? And if so, does the National Weather Service work with them, kind of like the eyes on the ground?
We do. And that's another point, another difference back then. Storm chasing was, really in its infancy, and not as many people were doing it, and people didn't have the equipment they have today, and they didn't have in your car radar,
right.
Yeah. And they didn't have the ability to send. There were no smartphones. You couldn't instantaneously upload stuff. Internet, 1998 internet. I mean,
it was rough.
It's just the whole communication, the flow of communication. Basically, spotters chasers or spotters would have to call us, and on a kind of antiquated. I think we did have like 98. Was that we were still Nokia, or were we in the Motorola Razor phase or something like that? But
I just noticed on your
you didn't have the data. The amount of data you could upload or the avenue where you could take pictures and send them, or video clips and upload them to Twitter instantaneously, or send it, Facebook. You didn't have that back then.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of your posts on the storm reports are talking about ham radio operators reporting tornado on the ground.
There's another one, a vitally important voice for the National Weather Service.
Yeah.
Ham radio operators in real time.
So there's a lot of people that are asking a lot of questions, and I'm going to get a couple more in, but they're all also asking me to have you back for more, because you are truly a wealth of information. So just know I'm going to come calling again.
All right.
Okay, so Brian's asked, and he's asked a couple of times, and I apologize to you, Brian. When the weather satellites are launched from the Kennedy Space Center, who gets the data first? NASA, local TV stations, or the National Weather Service? That's part one. And part two is, how's the data collected and processed to go on the air for TV? So I can handle the data processed is just once it hits the government servers, our vendor then turns around and figures out how to get it. But who gets the data from the weather satellites first? It would be you guys, right?
Well, first it's beamed down to what's called a receiving station. It's a satellite dish, and it receives that data, and then from there it goes to a central processing center. I believe it's I don't know if it's Reston, Virginia. It's somewhere up north, I believe. Mm-hmm. And from there it gets distributed. It gets distributed. I think it's pretty much simultaneously. It gets distributed to vendors and weather offices.
Yeah.
I think the throughput, the wideband capacity is larger, obviously, for the line offices, the Weather Service office, the forecast centers like the Weather Prediction Center, National Hurricane Center. They're kind of prioritized as far as how much bandwidth they get to get all that data. And there's another thing, technology, satellite data. What we had back then, we had visible imagery, 4-kilometer resolution, water vapor imagery, 8-kilometer resolution.
Oh, wow.
IR 4-kilometer resolution, and 2 channels of it. Now we have like 15 channels. Yeah. We have half-kilometer, and it was every 15 minutes. The satellite data was 15 minutes. Now we get it routinely every 5 minutes, and during severe weather events, we do what's called it used to be called rapid scan, and now it's called MDS, a mesoscale domain sector, and it's and you can get 2 of them for each satellite. Goes east and goes west.
Yeah. So
theoretically, during a hurricane, you could have both mesoscale domain sectors pointed over the same spot and get.
Uh-oh, we lost him. The call dropped. What he was going to say is, theoretically, during a hurricane situation, you could get a 2-channel mesoscale satellite, and we do routinely use that. Wow. The call dropped. Well, listen, Tony needs to go home anyway. He's been awake for 100 hours. I cannot thank Tony Cristaldi enough for coming and hanging out for Coffee Talk. I will get him back on here, I promise. He's such a wealth of information, and during severe weather, I so often have I bounced things off of him. He's a good guy. He's a good guy. I'm so grateful for him to chat with us. So at any rate, we will have Tony back on. Sorry we couldn't formally thank him for it. But yeah, listen, people, that is just one of the meteorologists over at the National Weather Service that we work with. It's the part of the weather field you just don't see, but it is such a vital part. And we are just so grateful for not just him, but for all of the National Weather Service meteorologists that we work with. So anyway, that's that for the Coffee Talk drive-through today. Thank you so much for hanging out and chatting. And listen, you just never know. You just never know what else we can learn. I certainly learned some things. It's going to take me a minute to kind of wrap my head around the idea that there could have been another RV park that was impacted. That part's going to resonate for a minute, because the '98 tornadoes were one of those situations where I had. You got zapped. Hold on, I'll fix it. Yeah, give me a sec. I'll fix it. I'm the director and the nerd. There he is.
There we go. Okay, I'm live again.
All right, he's back. Well, we want to let you go anyway.
What were we talking about?
We were talking about the 1 minute updates on the new GOES.
Oh yeah, and you could get 30-second updates if you have both mesoscale domain sectors pointed at the
30-second because they're alternating.
Yes.
I didn't know that.
You can get that. Yeah, they do that for like only special occasions, like real intense, very intense hurricanes or significant severe weather outbreaks, things like that is when they do that. But most of the time they prioritize it, basically for SPC and National Hurricane Center, and then the forecast office.
But you guys do have the opportunity to put in a request if there's a major event.
Oh yeah, yep, we do that. But I mean, 1 minute imagery. It's like I said back. I had the original white paper. And it's from 2000.
Yeah.
It's called the requirements document for the next generation of GOES. And I saw that, I read this and I highlighted all the cool things. I was like, they'll never be able to do this. And they did all that and more. I mean, it's amazing. The nighttime infrared imagery.
Yes.
The ability to see hot spots in higher resolution, 2 kilometer it's 2 kilometer resolution. The GOES, all these derived products you can get, the nighttime RGB for fog and stratus, the GOES fire temperature, the GOES land surface temperature.
Yeah.
All this, it goes back to talking about the satellite data and the receiving station.
Yeah.
It has so much more data to process. We're talking about, instead of four channels, you're talking about 13 channels of data that come from a satellite.
Yeah.
All these different infrared bands. You have 3 different water vapor bands instead of 1, and they're all much higher resolution.
Yeah.
So these receiving stations really need, have to be up to date tech wise to be able to process all this information.
And I would also add to everybody that Tony is when these satellites came up, it was Tony messaging back and forth with me, trying to help me understand what all this stuff was. Because again, it's not like I'm getting pamphlets, it's talking about these new satellites. I'm covering it saying, there's all this new data, but Tony was the one, there was a fog, and, there was a foggy morning, and none of our weather stations were showing it. But you were on the floor that morning, and you were issuing, special weather statements. I'm like, what's going on? And you showed me some of the new data, which our vendor does not get, because, to your point, Tony, it's just too much data.
Yeah, you really have to. It's like with model data. You really have to pick and choose.
Yeah.
What you look at. Like, there's another example: dust and Saharan air layer.
Right.
For the tropics.
Right.
Those are another 2 products that we never used to have. It's just so much has changed in 25 years. Like I said, we could do a single show on it.
And we need to. Let me ask you one more question, then I need to let you go, for God's sake. You need to get some sleep. Mickey's asking, and I think this is fascinating, what's the next big thing for radar advancement?
Well, there was talk of, I got to remember what it's called here, CASA. It was basically neighborhood radars that were much lower power, but you'd be able to attach them on, let me look it up.
Like an X-band kind of thing?
Let me take a look and see what. CASA radar network. What does it even stand for?
As
These
I'm
are
over here Googling it as
it's
well.
yeah, it's they're lower power, but the idea is, and they don't have as much range, but they're much smaller and they're easier to. You could put them in theory, put them in a lot more locations,
Yeah.
and fill in those gaps. You know, it speaks to the question we talked about earlier,
Yeah.
and it would, these, it's almost like quote unquote neighborhood radars.
Hmm.
They're low power, they're inexpensive. I haven't heard there was a push for that, and it probably started maybe 8-10 years ago. But I think that's going to be the next big thing, is these higher resolution, lower power
Like an
radars.
X-band kind of thing.
Yeah, and it would basically fill the gaps. That's kind of the big problem we have with the radars now. It's just filling in those gaps, and that would help. That would help tremendously.
You have blown my mind several times this morning. I'm so grateful for your time. Listen, go home. I owe you a Coke. Okay. I thank you so much, Tony, for hanging with us. I'm going to.
Yeah, we'll do this again sometime.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you back. You are beyond a wealth of knowledge. So thank you very much, sir.
Thanks.
All
Good
right.
talking to you.
Thank you. Good talking to you, buddy.
Good interacting with everyone.
All right. That is Tony Cristaldi, meteorologist over at the National Weather Service office in Melbourne. Not only does he have a wealth of knowledge from experience, but a wealth of knowledge because he's just a damn good Met. So there's that. All right. Listen, it's going to be hot today, people. Lots and lots of heat next couple of days, but we've got some sunshine too. So get in the pool and enjoy. Be the sunshine in someone else's day. I will see you all at 3:30 for the afternoon coffee talk. Thank you all for hanging out. Bye.